all trade agreements to which Canada is a party. We recommend that the Special Rapporteur Expert Mechanism and Permanent Forum Collaborative conduct a broad thematic study of means to ensure trade agreements are protected.
I thank the representative of Manitoba, Kiwatinowi Okimakanak, for their statement. I now call upon my esteemed colleague, Permanent Forum Member Tove Soldalkan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Allow me at this time also to, I don't know, I mean, if I want to pose question, but yeah, I guess it's a question. And it relates to this conflation issue that we have, that I mentioned earlier, but also been mentioned by several Indigenous peoples organizations over the past days. And that is the conflation of Indigenous peoples with local communities, especially when it comes to within the context of the environmental, multilateral environment agreement and the processes thereunder. The previous Special Rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous peoples, Francisco Carli, when he first wrote a statement about it, he encouraged local communities to sort of find their own path of identifying their rights. And now I hear also from our new Special Rapporteur that he wished to take this matter up. But I would be curious to hear from him, but also from our colleagues of the EMRET. I see now that Cheryl Lightfoot is sitting there now. I mean, how they plan to take this up? I mean, what are their ideas? I mean, we know that, I mean, the local communities actually started off with the CBD Convention, where in the Article 8J, local communities was qualified by, I quote, embodying traditional lifestyles. And I think at that time, UNDRIP had not been, it was many years before the adoption of UNDRIP. So at that time it was Indigenous peoples active in those fora, simply had to accept it and to somehow relate it to that they were talking about in fact Indigenous peoples, but whose state did not recognize them as such. But today we see all sorts of very diverse groups, from religious groups, I don't know, I mean, occupational groups who all identify under the term of local communities. So I would be really curious to just get your thinking. I know that this is not something that can be solved today, but could I have your thinking on this difficult issue? Thank you.
I thank my esteemed colleague, Permanent Forum Member Tove Soldalkan, for her questions. I think the Special Rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous peoples will be making some remarks just a bit closer to the end. So at this point, I will ask a few more Indigenous peoples organizations to provide their interventions. So I'm going to call upon the representative of Karbadia Chataglam Jana Samhati Samiti PCJSS.
To our friends at PCJSS for ceding their time to Axels. It is not hyperbolic to say that in Japan, CEDAW General Recommendation 39 has not been implemented at all. This is inextricably linked to the lack of case law in Japan where Indigenous rights have been successfully argued. In 2024, the Raporo Ainu lost their case on Samoan fishing rights in the Sapporo District Court, which was the first case to invoke Indigenous rights in its argument. Lack of recognition of collective Indigenous rights in Japan will make it almost impossible to pass meaningful legislation that aligns with General Recommendation 39, including recommendations such as 5AA to adopt and effectively implement legislation that prevents, prohibits, and responds to gender-based violence. As evidenced by last week's news of 3 more women being violently attacked by U.S. Marines in the Ryukyu Islands, interpersonal violence by military servicemen on Ryukyuan women is an extremely acute issue. Data on violence by U.S. military personnel specifically on Ryukyuan women, however, is difficult to obtain because official reporting does not disaggregate Ryukyuans as Indigenous or even a distinct group. Instead, the Japanese government argues that because we speak Japanese, have Japanese passports, and are educated in the Japanese education system, we are Japanese. Instead, statistics are conducted by analyzing these types of crimes within the prefecture. Ryukyuans are the majority population within Okinawa Prefecture, and so reasonable approximations of the disproportionate effects of military violence on Ryukyuan women and girls can be made, but this distinction does not show up in reporting. Because of structural inequalities that cause Ryukyuan women to be in closer proximity to military men, it is Ryukyuan women who are being attacked. Updated statistics are needed, but the data from the period from 2001 to 2018 shows that the prosecution rate for these types of crimes for cases from Okinawa Prefecture is about 13%, or 1/3 of Japan's national average. There are no timely or effective means for achieving justice for these types of crimes due to issues of jurisdiction and hurdles for extradition across the defense line. So long as there are military bases in the Ryukyu Islands, it will be impossible to enact General Recommendation 39. CEDAW had the opportunity to invoke General Recommendation 39 in reference to Ryukyuan women and girls in its periodic report on Japan from last year, but in the 2 references to this issue, the report did not identify Ryukyuans as Indigenous peoples. We implored the treaty bodies to cross-reference each other's work so that these such slips do not happen again. Finally, we invite Japan or the United States to address this issue in a statement while the permanent forum is going, so that we can learn what their plan is to address these grave violations. I
thank the representative of PCJSS for their statement. I now call upon my esteemed colleague, permanent forum member, Hannah McGlade.
Australia will go to the election in the coming week, 3 years after the last, when the Prime Minister-elect Anthony Albanese committed to a historic process for voice, treaty and truth. After a disastrous referendum in 2023, we've seen a retreat from Indigenous rights as well as growing reports of racism. The absence of a national independent Indigenous representative body is a significant impediment to the implementation of UNDRIP. We can't effectively advocate about human rights and necessary reforms to make sure the declaration is upheld. The state of Victoria's modern-day treaty making should be the norm, but it's an exception. The First Nations Assembly is an independent, democratically elected voice for Victorian traditional owners living in Victoria. The Assembly is guided by the principles found in the Declaration and is on the way to realising these rights. This modern-day treaty process includes 3 elements: treaty negotiating framework, treaty authority, and self-determination fund. Self-determination and empowerment are the central principles within the framework which guide First Peoples and states during negotiations. These principles are protected by law and must be followed by all parties. The framework requires all parties in the treaty negotiations engage with Aboriginal law and cultural authority respectfully and in good faith. The Assembly has been building partnerships with community, knowledge holders and experts in health, housing, education and more to ensure the treaty is reflective of communities' priorities. facilitate and oversee treaty negotiations, administer the treaty negotiation framework, resolve disputes in treaty negotiations, and carry out research to support the treaty negotiations. The treaty authority is led by 5 First Nations people who are respected members of their communities. The First Nations Assembly is also responsible for administering the Self-Determination Fund to support First Peoples to have equal standing with the state in treaty negotiations and provide a financial resource independent from the state. One of the first collective actions of the Assembly was to establish the Europe Justice Commission, acknowledging there can be no treaties without truth-telling. The Europe Justice Commission is the first formal truth-telling process in Australia. It is a truth and justice process with Royal Commission powers. The word Europe means truth in the Wamba Wamba language. The Europe Justice Commission is led by 5 commissioners, of whom 4 are Aboriginal and 3 are Victorian Indigenous people. No Australian governments have entered into a treaty in our country. The Victorian process is the first of its kind and gaining momentum. This is in contrast to other Australian jurisdictions where treaty and truth processes seeking to facilitate Aboriginal self-determination in action are being abandoned and legislation recently repealed. Through the current treaty negotiations, the Assembly intends to realise Article 3 and 4 in UNDRIP and seeking to negotiate a First Peoples representative body with functions to make laws and representations to government, run sovereign wealth and budget funds, facilitate truth-telling and healing, develop community capabilities or self-government, oversee state accountability and make statutory decisions. This future First Peoples representative body will ensure that in Victoria, First Peoples have control over the decisions affecting Indigenous peoples. The Victorian treaty making underway since 2019 shows implementation of the Declaration rights can happen in Australia where there is political will. Australia should honour its promise for voice, treaty and truth at the last federal election. The Prime Minister now tells us that the Uluru Statement for voice, treaty and truth is over, but it's not up to government to pick and choose what human rights they uphold and implement. These rights are our inherent rights as Indigenous people that must be respected always. Thank you.
I thank my colleague, Permanent Forum Member Hannah McLeod, for their statement. I now call upon the representative of Sandhill Band of Indians.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Kualito nani, maklakli ye toshti, mayolopaki ikwat ni misita. Good day, Madam Chair, sisters and brothers present here. My heart becomes happy when I see everybody here. I'm Guadalupe Casatacosta Masatsi, Okishidanudi, of the Sandhill Band of Indians, and the International Council of First Nations. I am the ambassador to the Polynesian Kingdom of Tui, and I am also the International Cultural Attaché for Repatriation of Antiquities and Artifacts, and to the Special Rapporteur and the expert mechanism. These are our concrete proposals. We recommend that the Permanent Forum call for an immediate end to worldwide war, particularly in Palestine and Ukraine, and to focus on the survival of humanity as one human race. We recommend the Permanent Forum to demand an immediate moratorium on the indiscriminate mass deportation happening in this country, in this city, even as we sit here today, happening in broad daylight without respect for due process and violating international laws and human rights. And in fact, the largest mass removal and relocation of original First Nation peoples of this hemisphere is happening in the history of this country. So we need a moratorium to ensure safety and dignity in the processes of immigration and for refugees protection, as no human being is illegal. Madam Chair, we recommend the Permanent Forum focus on the needs and the rights of all peoples, particularly the Xontepec Hidalgo, Mexico, to the fresh water that comes from the Mother Earth that is being diverted to many industries. And we recommend that the Permanent Forum help us establish an international First Nations embassy of health, environment, and free and just trade so that most isolated communities can get their produce to market. I bring your attention to the needs that I mentioned here and all the ones ones that have been mentioned before, is the result of a lack of respect and a lack of officialization or spirituality of our way of life. Therefore, we recommend Further Forum, please help us take the necessary steps to secure the return back to Mexico from the Vatican Library of our most precious sacred book, Amoshli, called Código Borgia today. And the Article 11.2 states that the state shall provide redress that includes restitution with respect to cultural, spiritual, intellectual property taken without free prior consent. Our Amoshli is a combination of thousands of years by thousands of people across thousands of miles of this hemisphere. In short, it's a continental spiritual patrimony. And we have previously written to His Holiness Pope Francis Jorge Mario Portorio, and we have received some response. Now we ask may he rest in peace. And we hope that our efforts do not die and are buried with him. Finally, thank you. Join us as we continue to write the International Declaration of Independent and Sovereign First Nations. Leonard Peltier is free and Cuauhtemoc has returned. Tlazohcamati.
I thank the representative of Sandhill Band of Indians for their statement. I now call upon the representative of Public Organization of the Murmansk Region, Association of the Kola Sami.
Председатель, на 24-й сессии постоянного форума много говорили о принципах должной смотрительности, в частности, в Польше. Напоминаю, мы обеспокоены тем, что множество компаний продолжают или начинают деятельность без учета стандартов в отношении коренных народов бизнеса. Это связано с тем, что применение таких принципов не урегулировано в нормативных документах. В этой связи мы поддерживаем рекомендации экспертного механизма, которые подчеркивают важность совершенствования законодательства корпоративных стандартов, системы публичной нефинансовой отчетности и системы рейтингования компаний. А также ознакомились с техническими рекомендациями экспертного механизма в адрес Норвегии по итогам странового взаимодействия. Надеемся, что правительство Норвегии с должным вниманием отнесется к этому документу и примет меры для прекращения нарушений прав народа сами, включая творческие сообщества сами. Некоторые из предложений экспертного механизма, адресованные Норвегии, имеют универсальный характер и могут применяться государствами и компаниями во всех регионах. В частности, рекомендации о развитии как законодательства, так и добровольных стандартов, а также рекомендация о рейтинговании компаний на основе соблюдения прав человека. В последние годы разнообразные рейтинги стали повсеместным и значительным явлением в большинстве стран мира. С опорой на них принимается все больше решений как частными компаниями, так и государственными структурами и отдельными людьми, а также разделяются все больше ресурсов. Рейтинги создают репутационные риски, в результате чего раскрытие слабых практик у тех, кто занимает низкие места в рейтинге, приведет к повышению качества процедур должной смотрительности. Считаем, что введение системы рейтингования будет стимулировать компании к диалогу с коренными народами. Предлагаем экспертному механизму и спецдокладчику всесторонне исследовать применение принципа должной смотрительности в различных субъективных регионах. Экспертному механизму предлагаем продолжить работу по выработке конкретных предложений по совершенствованию законодательства, корпоративных стандартов, системы публичной и финансовой отчетности и системы рейтингования компаний. И еще, мы включили исследование спецдокладчика о мобильных коренных народах и заметили в параграфе 84 информацию о том, что из-за исключения Норвегии, России, Финляндии и Швеции информации о самой культуре учебной программы самы столкнулись с насилием и применением расизма. Отмечу, что с российскими самыми этот вопрос не обсуждался. Спасибо.
I thank the representative of the Public Organization of the Murmansk Region Association of the Kola Sami. I now call upon the representative of Organización Nacional Indígena de Colombia, ONE.
Presidenta, representantes de los pueblos indígenas, desde la Organización Nacional Indígena de Colombia denunciamos una década de anulación sistemática de las parterías indígenas en agendas globales de salud. Desde el estado del mundo de la partería en 2024 hasta los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible desde el 2030, esta exclusión viola nuestro derecho a la salud culturalmente adecuada, nuestro derecho a la consulta previa y autodeterminación consagrados en el Convenio 169 de la OIT. El borramiento sistemático de la partería indígena de las políticas de salud pública de las agencias oficiales de Naciones Unidas es una práctica colonial que desfigura las luchas históricas de los pueblos y perpetúa su genocidio. La partería indígena es reconocida en la Declaración de Naciones Unidas y también es un determinante de la salud indígena. Las parteras son guardianas de la vida y pilares de las economías del cuidado y pervivencia de nuestros pueblos. Su trabajo, a menudo no remunerado, sostiene la salud materna y neonatal en comunidades marginadas, tejiendo redes de reciprocidad y resistencia cultural. Esta práctica biocultural, inseparable de nuestros saberes ancestrales, territorios y espiritualidad, depende de su transmisión intergeneracional para garantizar la pervivencia de nuestros pueblos. Sin embargo, su exclusión del ODS 3 perpetúa una deuda histórica, alimentando la discriminación y criminalización de su oficio y pone en riesgo la integridad y pervivencia de nuestras comunidades. Llamamos a los pueblos indígenas a adherirse a una agenda de rectificación urgente de la partería indígena y su borramiento sistemático, y exigimos: 1. Que los estados, conforme el convenio 169, incluyan a las parteras indígenas en los indicadores del ODS 3, mediante consulta previa, reconociendo su aporte a la economía del cuidado y la pervivencia de los pueblos indígenas. 2. Que ONU, UNFPA, OMS y OPS integren explícitamente la partería indígena en las estrategias de salud global, valorando su rol en la salvaguarda de conocimientos, eliminando bloqueos institucionales y promoviendo sistemas de salud interculturales, como lo declara la Recomendación 39. 3. Que se garantice el financiamiento directo para las parteras, respetando su autonomía y fortaleciendo sus prácticas como expresión de los derechos bioculturales de los pueblos indígenas. Hacemos un llamado a este foro para que se respete y garantice una agenda de rectificación por la inclusión explícita y reparación de la partería indígena, un grito colectivo en resistencia por nuestras parteras y la pervivencia de nuestros pueblos. Gracias.
I thank the representative of ONIF for their statement. I now call upon my esteemed colleague, Permanent Forum Member Tina Solskjaer.
Благодарю, председатель. Вопрос защиты представителей коренных народов в судебной системе – это важная, многослойная тема, включающая правовые, социальные, культурные аспекты. Я хочу коснуться немножко Российской Федерации, где показать, как работает на сегодняшний день вся система по защите прав коренных малочисленных народов. У нас есть Конституция Российской Федерации, статья 69, которая гарантирует права коренных народов. Федеральный закон номер 82 о гарантиях прав коренных малочисленных народов. Также есть законодательные акты субъектов Российской Федерации, в которых проживают коренные малочисленные народы. В ряде случаев представители коренных малочисленных народов имеют право на бесплатную юридическую помощь, особенно если доход ниже прожиточного минимума. Прожиточный минимум в России – это 17 тысяч рублей. Понятно, что кто может обратиться за этой помощью, и практика показывает, что данная помощь, она не всегда положительна. Практически все дела остаются безвыигрышными. Российская Федерация подписала, но не ратифицировала конвенцию МОД 169. Однако обязана соблюдать принципы ООН по правам коренных малочисленных народов. Отмечу отсутствие эффективного доступа к правосудию. Именно много представителей коренных малочисленных живут в отдаленных регионах, где нет адвокатов, нет судов и нет интернета. Зачастую представители коренных малочисленных народов не владеют русским языком на уровне, достаточном для защиты своих прав в суде. Порой отсутствует правовая грамотность. Есть такие кейсы, когда невозможно было доказать свою правоту только потому, что человек не понимал, что с него спрашивают. Нет подготовки юристов, специализирующих на правах коренных малочисленных, особенно в регионах их компактного проживания. Часто наши права ущемляются при добыче природных ресурсов на наших землях. Это судебные дела ведутся с перекосом в пользу бизнеса и государства. И таких кейсов много. Хочу отметить нет громкого дела Сергея Кичимова, который сегодня, к сожалению, ушел в мир предков. В делах, где интересы коренного народа противоречат интересам крупных компаний, суды часто являются независимыми. Что можно предложить? Первое. Создание института правозащитных адвокатов по делам коренных малочисленных народов, где возможна подготовка и финансирование адвокатов, специализирующих на правах коренных народов. Желательно, конечно, из самих коренных малочисленных народов. Создать банк данных таких защитников. Второе. Обязательное предоставление переводчика и культурного медиатора при судебных разбирательствах. Третье. Группы юридической защиты при университетах, которые могут работать с делами коренных народов в сотрудничестве с правозащитными НКО. Четвертое. Независимый мониторинг и статистика по судебным делам, сбор и публикация данных по судебным делам с участием коренных малочисленных народов, желательно анонимно. Пятое. Ратификация конвенции МОД 169. Это дало бы юридически обязывающий статус международным стандартам защиты коренных народов. Благодарю.
I thank my esteemed colleague, Permanent Forum Member Valentina Sokina for her comments. I would like to now provide some time for the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to provide their comments or reflections on the questions and comments we have heard this afternoon, as well followed by Empress. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to speak again. And let me sincerely thank the RTC colleague who raised the issue first, and to Madam Tole who raised it second, and to many others actually. I've had little time to be present in the plenary for that couple of meetings, and it has been a constant question. So it's for me an opportunity. I thought people would be patient to wait for the report, but I realized people need some element. Just to start now, Madam Chair. And it's something that I decided to do to address what I would call the elephant in the room. This has been an elephant in the room for indigenous people's rights, for us who have been active on this issue. So it could be something like self-inflicted. Because in any case, it's the choice that I took to start with the report on recognition, and which implicitly leads you to touch into concepts. But the reason for me for doing this, and that's where I'm thankful to the question, because it's really important to understand why did I make such decision to report on recognition. As I said in my introduction, Madam Chair,